Resident Evil 9 Requiem is finally here, and this is a big game. Like, big. Honestly, I would argue it might be the biggest Resident Evil release Capcom has ever put out, at least in terms of ambition and how much it feels like a culmination of modern Resident Evil. I've spent the last couple of days completely immersed in this game, and this is my review. Quick context, I played on the PS5 Pro. This review is 100% spoiler-free, and any footage I show will only be from the opening couple of hours. Requiem is absolutely one of those games you don't want ruined, so I'm not even going to flirt with spoilers. And if you came here just wondering if it's good, I'll say it right now, it's a great game. But it's also a really interesting game because it's not just doing one thing. Requiem is basically Capcom saying, what if we put 2 Resident Evil games inside one package and we fully commit to both? And surprisingly, it works. Mostly. So in Requiem, you play as 2 characters. Newcomer Grace Ashcroft and series veteran Leon S. Kennedy. The game is a mostly linear experience, and you switch back and forth between the 2 characters in a structure that reminded me of Resident Evil 2, but the difference is that in RE2, the 2 campaigns feel like variations of the same core style. Here, this gameplay is dramatically different, almost like 2 separate genres living in the same world. Grace's side is survival horror, very Resident Evil 7 energy. It's tense, slow, oppressive, and you constantly feel like prey. Leon's side is action horror, very Resident Evil 4, except Leon feels even more capable here, like he graduated from Survive the Village to John Wick with trauma. Before going in, I was nervous about that because one of my biggest criticisms of certain Resident Evil games, and I love this franchise, don't get me wrong, is when the tone and pacing become inconsistent. Resident Evil 7 is the perfect example. Early game is pure dread, and then later on it starts to feel a little bit more action heavy. That shift can feel weird if you're really locked into the horror vibe. So I was worried this game would feel like Whiplash. One minute you're sweating, the next minute you're doing roundhouse kicks like it's a WWE match. And I'll be honest, switching can be jarring. You'll go from Grace, who's barely holding it together, to Leon, who in the first 5 minutes is casually picking up a firefighter axe and throwing it into a group of enemies like he's done this every Tuesday for the last decade. Now, if you enjoy both styles of Resident Evil, if you love both RE7 and RE4, then you'll probably forgive it because it's fun. And if you're someone who only likes one flavor, like you loved Biohazard but you don't care for RE4 style action, or you loved RE4 but you don't want the slow stealth horror, then yeah, this could be a problem. It's basically 2 different audiences in one game, and Capcom is clearly trying to please both. For me personally, I love both, so I did have a great time, and I think overall this is the best way to describe Requiem. This is Resident Evil greatest hits. Capcom didn't just bring back vibes, they brought back design DNA. So let's break it down. Grace's gameplay, it's survival horror at its best. Grace's sections are the classic survival horror side of the franchise. Stealth first, heavy on avoidance, resource management and exploration. You're moving through environments carefully, listening to sounds, reading rooms, taking corners slow, because you don't want to waste ammo, you don't want to waste healing, and sometimes you don't even want to fight at all. Her chapters feel like Resident Evil 7 in the best ways. You feel vulnerable, you feel hunted, and the atmosphere constantly makes you uneasy. There are moments where the game just wants you to feel uncomfortable. Not in a cheesy way, in a why does this hallway make me feel like I'm being watched kind of way. And I thought nothing would surprise me after Biohazard and Village. I really did. I've played enough horror games where I'm like, okay, yeah, I know how this goes. But Requiem had multiple moments where I genuinely gasped out loud, like real reaction, not stream reaction. The game does a fantastic job creating tension and then paying it off with moments that feel earned. One thing I loved about Grace's side is how much it makes you feel relief in safe areas. When you find a room where you can breathe, it actually feels like you can unclench your entire body. There were multiple times where I hit a safe space and I just sat there for a second, not even doing inventory, just soaking in the fact that I survived whatever I just went through. And Grace isn't helpless. You do get tools, you do get weapons, but the resources are beyond scarce. You really have to consider every shot and every heal. And because of that scarcity, Requiem creates one of the most genuine panic decisions I've ever had in a Resident Evil game. For example, there was a moment, and I'm keeping this vague, where enemies suddenly dropped in on me and my first instinct wasn't to think, it was pure reaction. I pulled out the revolver, the Requiem, which hits like a cannon, and I fired immediately. And as soon as I pulled the trigger, my brain caught up and went, oh no, I'm gonna need that ammo later. But that's what made it such a great moment. The game pulled the impulsive fear response out of me. It didn't feel like I was playing optimally. It felt like I was surviving, and that's what survival horror is supposed to do. Grace's sections are still very Resident Evil in terms of structure too. You're piecing together mysteries, finding items, solving puzzles, unlocking shortcuts, classic loop. But here's my biggest critique with Grace's side. Sometimes the objectives feel too similar. There are stretches where it leans heavily into that classic Resident Evil chain of get this puzzle piece to open a closet that gives you a key that opens a door that gets you into a room that gives you another keyhole that needs another key that you have to go find. And yes, that's Resident Evil, that's the formula. But after a while, I started to feel like Capcom was playing the hits a little too safely. There were a couple moments where I hit a go activate 3 switches style objective or a familiar generator setup, and I kind of rolled my eyes. Not because it's bad, but because it's predictable. And honestly, that might be my biggest gripe with the game. Grace's horror is so strong that I wish the moment-to-moment objectives were a little more creative, because the atmosphere is doing so much heavy lifting. That said, even with that criticism, Grace's chapters include some of the best horror sequences I've ever played. It brought me right back to early Biohazard, where everything feels like a hopeless uphill battle, and I loved it. Now, on the other side of the game, you have Leon. And Leon is basically classic Resident Evil 4 Leon. Awkward catchphrases and all. You are a one-man zombie killing machine, and it is an absolute joy to play. Capcom clearly knows how much people adore RE4, and they brought back that style in a big way. The shooting feels satisfying and meaty, the weapons have weight, and the environments give you opportunities to take out enemies in a fun way. And Leon has this new toy that replaces the knife, the hatchet. This hatchet is ridiculously overpowered in the best way. You can swing it as a melee weapon, use it to break out of grapples, and the reason it feels borderline unfair is because you can sharpen it infinitely, and it only takes a few seconds. Capcom clearly wanted Leon to feel unstoppable, like you're encouraged to play aggressively and just go nuts. And the game supports that with environmental takedowns and little brutal interactions, like slamming an enemy's head onto a surface. It just adds enough extra flavor to make combat feel more physical. If Grace's side is survive, Leon's side is dominate. Now, my one tiny disappointment on Leon's side, which if you haven't even played the other Resident Evil games, it won't mean anything to you. There's no beloved merchant type character. Instead, upgrades are handled through a computer system. It works, it's fine, it's functional, but man, it's hard not to miss that merchant vibe, especially how much this game pulls from RE4's design language. Still, Leon's sections are pure fun. It's that satisfying action horror flow where you're managing enemies, positioning, choosing weapons, and feeling like a complete badass. So story-wise, Requiem is honestly everything I wanted from a modern Resident Evil entry. For me, Resident Evil is about surviving something brutal while piecing together a messy, convoluted mystery. It's about finding files, seeing weird experiments, connecting the dots, and slowly realizing you're in the middle of something bigger than you thought. Requiem nails that. It introduces new characters and story elements that expand the world, and it also adds lore that makes the franchise feel bigger without feeling like it's rewriting everything. Going in, one of my hopes was that we would learn more about key aspects of the franchise, and without spoiling anything, I can absolutely say the game scratches that itch. I was constantly on the edge of my seat, waiting to learn more about Grace's importance, the role of Victor, and what Leon has been up to. But here's the thing. Requiem definitely assumes you've played the previous games. Not just you've played 1 or 2. It assumes you know the lore. It assumes you know the vibe. It assumes you understand the series quirks. And I think Capcom could have toned that down just a little bit. There are moments where it feels like the game is winking at the camera, like it knows you're a fan and it wants you to catch the reference. Sometimes that works, sometimes it's charming, but other times it can feel a little heavy-handed. And if you're new to the series, you might feel lost or like you're missing context. I personally didn't mind because I love Resident Evil and I like that Capcom made a game that assumes you've been on the journey, but since Requiem is getting a lot of attention, it's worth mentioning this isn't the easiest entry point. Now we have to talk about the length. I finished this game in about 10 hours, and for a $70 game, that's not a lot. Personally, I felt the quality was high enough that I didn't regret buying it. The production value, the atmosphere, the care, it's all there. But for some people, that will be a deal breaker. If you're someone who can afford 1 or 2 games a year and you need something with a massive time investment, Requiem might not be the best value on paper. It does have replay value though because of the perspective system. At any time, you can switch between first and third person as either character. I played the way the game suggests, Leon in third person, Grace in first person. But when I experimented with the opposite setup, it genuinely felt like a different game. Not just a novelty, a different experience. Does that fully justify $70? Not really, but it helps. And let's talk about performance and visuals. As a reminder, I played on PS5 Pro. I shudder to think what the Switch plays like. So on PS5 Pro, the game looks fantastic. Like genuinely one of the best Resident Evil games. I didn't run into crashes, I didn't run into major bugs, and performance felt very stable. At 4K, I was hovering around 90 frames per second most of the time. During heavier action scenes, it would dip a bit, but nothing that pulled me out of the experience. The only real visual issue I noticed was texture quality in a few spots. Some fire effects looked a little blocky, and in brighter areas, there were moments where you could see polygon edges more than you'd expect. Not awful, but noticeable because so much of the game looked so clean and polished. Overall though, from a technical standpoint, this was a very smooth experience for me. So overall, those are my thoughts on Resident Evil 9 Requiem. I absolutely love this game. If you're a fan of modern Resident Evil, especially if you love both RE4 style action and RE7 style horror, you're going to have an amazing time. Capcom pulled off something really cool by merging the franchise's 2 strongest identities into one experience. If you only like one style, the back and forth structure might not fully land for you because Grace and Leon play very differently. And if this is your first Resident Evil, you might feel a bit lost at times because the game assumes you're familiar with the lore and the series rhythms. But for longtime fans, this is basically Resident Evil's victory lap. It's Resident Evil best hits, in a way that still feels exciting. It made me uncomfortable, it made me grin, it made me panic, and it made me want more. I'm already excited for Resident Evil 10, and I'm genuinely looking forward to replaying this game in the opposite perspectives to see how different it feels. So let me know what you thought of Requiem in the comments below, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.